Welcome to Step Up, where we learn from the best of the best in business. I'm David Wolf, media producer, and now here's your host, speaker psychologist, supporter of military families, and of course, sassy grandmother, Dr. Margarita Gurry.
Well, hello, David Wolf. Thank you for that intro. Today we have with us a woman who's going to teach everyone about courage. And I think that courage is certainly the gift that keeps on giving. Her name is Shelly Francis. Welcome, Shelly Francis.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be on your show.
Oh, we're just delighted. So the first question I have is, tell me, how did you get from marketing and communications to the world of courage?
Well, because I'm the marketing and communications director for a nonprofit called the Center for Courage and Renewal. And that's who I wrote the book for. When I was job hunting and saw that title, I'm like, that would be the kind of company I would love to work for.
That's amazing. I had thought maybe you wrote the book and then the center got started. So I wasn't sure about the history on that. That's pretty amazing. So I think one of the things that people don't understand is courage. I understand that you have 5 distinctions, different types of courage. Please tell us what those are.
This is really a fun piece of writing the book, learning about these various types of courage. So I think we mostly think of courage in terms of physical courage. You know, like soldiers have obviously going into battle, or people braving, battling with cancer. The moral courage is obviously the big one that we often think about in terms of standing up for what's right and fighting for what's right. But then I came across a few other types of courage. The third one is social courage. And that's the idea of risking being vulnerable, or risking letting people get to know the real you for the sake of overcoming isolation and connecting with people more authentically. Brené Brown is a researcher who's been talking a lot about that lately. It's kind of like overcoming shame and blame and just really connecting with other people and building community. The fourth one is creative courage. And I love that because I love creativity just in general. And, you know, writing a book is a sort of creative courage. But then there's the creative moments where we have to create new life after the one we're living isn't quite what we expected, or creating community, or creating solutions to really intractable problems. The creativity shows up in a lot of ways, and it's the antidote to the more disruptive types of action that we see. What can we do to build things back up again? And then the fifth type of courage is called collective courage. And I love that because that's the idea of people working together and finding encouragement from each other and giving courage to each other for something greater than ourselves.
What stops people from having courage?
Well, I'd say fear is the big one, or we stop in our tracks. Those stress responses that we hear about a lot are fight or flight. We get stuck in those default modes of when we're faced with stress. And those are good things when we're trying to really fight for our survival or run away from something chasing us, the big monster. But I also came across a couple other stress responses that are interesting to me. Freeze, when we're that deer caught in headlights. We just, at work, that could just show up like a stoic face, or just paralyzed around some project, not knowing how to go forward. And a fourth one I came across is flock. And that is a new one where newly recognized, I think, by researchers in terms of herd mentality or peer pressure, or that us and them that we see so much of, the real divisiveness. For each of those stress responses, though, there's an alternative, which is fortify. And so how do you fortify yourself to be ready with courage in the hard times when you least expect it?
And how is that different from resilience?
Well, I think it's part of resilience, and I think that resilience is one way to fortify ourselves, or that we become resilient when we learn how to tap our inner resources on a regular basis. That's what creates resiliency. I think there's other ways to reframe the ways we think about resiliency. And I love just the idea of words that start with RE, because in Latin, that means apply strength. And so I think of retreat instead of flee, or regain your sense of humor, or retreat. There's lots of RE words that we could play with to think of.
And I see the website is couragerenewal.org. So that's amazing. So we have the fight, flight, freeze with fright. And what was the fourth one?
Flock, like a flock of birds. And you could think of all of those as having positive aspects as well. They're not just a negative stress response. Fight for what's right, retreat when you need to leave, walk away from a toxic situation, the flee. I always have to do this in order.
Freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze. Freeze is that moment of pausing. I mean, just think about how often we think we have to have an answer on the spot or come up with a quick response. But what if we just pause for a second or even overnight, take a time out? And then flock is that sense of building community. Who are your people who can fortify you? Who are the people that can help you find your courage and give you encouragement?
So the first three are brain reactions from the amygdala and whatever. This flock, are the neuroscientists saying it's another brain reaction, or is it a trained reaction?
That's a really good question. I saw in one book that there are certain neurons, there's a couple different kinds, but mirror neurons, and another one whose name I'm forgetting, that show up in people more than other mammals, except elephants. That elephants have this tend and befriend kind of neuron. So I think it's some of both. I mean, I think...
That's interesting.
Yeah,
I'll look that up.
Humans need to be together.
You give me something to research. Ooh, I like finding those things. So what role does play and courage and the balance of life and all of that, what role does all of that have in the amount of courage that we have available to us? Help me understand the kind of life that invites courage.
Well, I think about finding courage in 5 different ways. And the first one is 3 big ideas and 2 key practices. And the first big idea is the idea of true self, and recognizing that inside each person is this inner wisdom, this inner strength and resiliency or resourcefulness. But you could also call it our soul, our spirit, that true self that doesn't change, even though at some point we grow. And so if I recognize that in me and can access that, and I recognize it in other people as well, we can connect on a different, deeper level as human beings.
Wow. Okay, and how about the other 2 big ideas?
So the second one is trust. And trust is first to trust in that true self, trust in that ability and your capacity to access that. And then it goes with the next one, which is trusting in community or other people. That best sense of flocking is who are your people that you can connect with it, because trust goes both ways. We often say we can't become better human beings on our own. We need other people to help us become our best selves. So the big idea around that also is practicing paradox. And that's that sense of feeling like there's lots of opposites going on, the either or, especially when we're faced with big decisions. It feels like there's only a black and a white choice. But if we look at all of the paradoxes of being human, like love and loss, life and death, breathing in, breathing out, if we can start looking at life as moving between our inner life and our outer life and letting one inform the other, then we can start holding more complexity and say that I can be afraid, but I can also take action. That's one way of applying it to courage. Or I can not quite know what's going to happen if I make this decision, but I can trust that I have the skills and the people and the capacity to go forward, even if it feels challenging.
One thing I've noticed, I've been a psychologist for, I guess, almost 40 years now. And in talking to people, one thing I've noticed is that some people, and you know what, I'll tell you a quick story. My mother used to say to some people, you know what, if you want to date somebody, if you have a good feeling about that guy, date the guy next to you. Because she knew that some people had bad judgment. They, for whatever reason. Why is it that some of us can't trust in community? Because we don't have good judgment. What happens there?
Well, maybe if we're not having good judgment, we're not trusting ourselves, or we're not listening to our gut and our heart. Maybe it's that not tapping into our true self. And that takes a lot of practice. I don't think everybody has that self-awareness or thinks about it all the time. At times in my life, I think I looked more outwardly for affirmation about which way to go rather than listening to my gut or my heart.
Yeah, I think sometimes when people are in phases where they don't really love themselves, I think they get blind to their instinct. I think they no longer listen, and I think most people have pretty good instincts but they sit on them. It's like stepping on the Superman cape, right? It's just kind of interesting. So, what do you suggest if somebody's stuck and they can't seem to access these amazing resources that we have available? What do you suggest?
Well, one of the things I would suggest is finding another person that you do trust that you could talk to, or another source of reflection on those key ideas. And it might be journaling if you don't have someone to talk to right away. But how could you start sharing your stories of where you're stuck with somebody? Who would feel safe to have a conversation with that about? Because I think we can't always figure it out on our own. That goes back to the idea of community, is needing other people to help us see where we're stuck. Choosing wisely and well isn't just making a bold choice, and it's not being stubborn and making the choice that you just feel compelled to make in that moment, but it's taking time to make sure that you're choosing the right choice, you're making the right choice. And we can't always do that by ourselves. I mean, I can remember times in my life where I was so ready for a change that I was going to make a decision whether it was a good idea or not, forcing my way into it, and didn't want to talk to my closest friends because I didn't want them talking me out of it. Now I know better, go back to some friends you can trust and say, what do you think about this idea? And bat it around before you feel like you're going to make a choice you can't take back.
So what do you say to those people who the people they're surrounded with aren't actually acting in their best interest? I mean, we know people like that. And their inner circle really says, no, you can't write a book. No, are you silly? No, you're just this. Stick to your lane. Tell us about that. I mean, how do we notice if we have surrounded ourselves with a community that doesn't really support our inner courage? And what do we do about it?
That might be one of those times where flight and flee show up, is maybe it's time to walk away from that group of friends and find a different group of friends, or find one other person that would have a willingness to support you without just advising you. And we have a specific practice around that in Courage and Renewal. Three practices actually that I think you would like. The idea of no fixing, no saving, no advising.
No
in
fixing,
the midst of a conversation.
No saving, no advising.
That goes against the grain of everything we think about as being helpful friends, right?
Yes. Yes. No fixing, no saving, no advising. Wow. Some people just don't know how to listen. Okay. So how do we do that?
Well, and you just named it. It's listening instead. And so how can we show up just for the sake of listening to each other? You have to combine that with another idea that helps us go into non-judgmental mode, is when the going gets rough, turn to wonder.
I love that.
And that is a practice that will take you out of that judgmental space where you're thinking, geez, what is wrong with that person? To instead say, I wonder what in that person's background is causing them to react that way right now. I wonder what's pushing their buttons, or I wonder why their reaction is pushing my buttons right now.
This is such a gem, Shelly. This one, it's all beautiful, but this one, wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about curiosity, but there's something about that phrase, turn to wonder, that's stickier in my brain, I think. And a lot of leaders who I interviewed for the book said this is one of the key practices that have shifted the way they interact with people, because it takes us out of judging and lets us return to the conversation just to listen for a moment. But it needs to be paired with no fixing, no saving, no advising. And one other practice, which is asking open, honest questions. And so this goes back to the premise of believing that each person has their own inner wisdom. So what's a question I could ask you that will help you tap into what that wisdom is? Not a question that I think I want you to answer because I already know what's best for you. But what's a question that would really serve this person in a moment that you couldn't possibly know the answer to?
So what are some examples of those wisdom inviting questions?
It's a lot of it is just listening to the conversation you're having with somebody and listening for the clues. But one quick one that we joke about is, have you thought of seeing a therapist is not an open, honest question? partly because it's a yes, no, and you want them to say, well, yeah, I'm going to do that. Thanks for your advice. But you could say, has this ever happened in your life before? Have you had a similar situation before that you got out of? Or
okay, so you're probing for insight, helping them look at patterns, and give me a few others, because I think people really, really need to do this. So many people just become talk show hosts and tell people what to do. Bah, 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 bah. And not everyone's like Oprah, who really knows how to ask good questions that invite reflection, you know?
Yeah, it definitely takes practice.
So has this ever happened in your life before? What else?
If people are trying to think between two options, you might say, well, how does it feel in your body when you think about those two options? What feels different between those two ideas? And some people might say, oh, I kind of get that tight chest feeling when I think of option A, or I kind of feel happy, or I feel in my gut something shows up differently.
That is just way cool. I mean, that is just wonderful. What else? One more.
Another question you might say could get into metaphor and say, if you were kind of describe this situation as an animal, what kind of animal would show up right now? And it'd be really fascinating to say, well, because I have this Great Dane hanging out with me today, I wonder if my problem is as big and smart as a Great Dane, or is it more like an elephant in the room?
Oh, that's funny.
So it taps into a different part of our brain when we start going into metaphor, and maybe that's
also humor. I think that that particular one is wise, because we know that humor gets us to a different place in the brain. And I think it invites curiosity in a mindful way, without negative judgment. So that's kind of interesting. Wow. So what questions have I not asked you that you would have liked me to ask you?
Well, I could give you a little history of how Courage and Renewal showed up and how these ideas came to be.
Okay, please.
Okay, so the Center for Courage and Renewal goes back about 25 years to our founder, an author, an activist, an educator named Parker Palmer. And he was working on a book called The Courage to Teach.
I saw that.
Yeah. And our first work as a nonprofit was working with teachers, helping them reconnect their love of teaching and who they are as a teacher with the work that they do, and try to decide whether they could find it within them to stay in the classroom and bring themselves more fully to their work, or whether it was time for them to find another job. So very much around vocation and choices. And then more and more professions started hearing about those retreats and programs. They used to be 2-year retreats 4 times a year that would take people through the seasons of their life in metaphor, in small groups. And so then we started working with physicians and nurses and nonprofit leaders, people in government, more and more professional sectors. And we're stretching into the business world now too, because really, who doesn't need more courage, right?
I think everyone needs more courage.
Yeah.
I think right now we're living in a world where it's the emperor's new clothes, and a lot of people running around buck naked, and everyone's saying that they look beautiful and that have great clothes. I think people are not having the courage to see what they see and say what they saw. I think we need more courage, which is why I was so excited that you're here. So in terms of starting a business, what are the kind of courage dilemmas people have that stop them or get them started on the wrong foot?
Well, I think when you start a business, it's important to ask yourself why you're starting a business and what you have the most energy for. And of course, there's all the business plan tactics of, assessing your strengths and your limits and getting your ducks in a row financially so that you can do it. But I've known a lot of people who have to take a leap of faith to start a business, because you're leaving the known, you're leaving somebody else buying your insurance policy, and suddenly you're responsible for a lot more. So it goes back to trust, and trusting that this time is right, trusting that you have what it takes, trusting that your great idea is coming from something deep inside. And I think if you can tap into your deepest reasons for wanting to have your own business and can stay aligned with those values and what gives you the most love and passion and energy for it, I think it'll take you through the hard times, but it can also create that leap of faith for you.
I think that is amazing. What made you take the leap of faith? You were doing a variety of things in the international sphere with marketing, organizational, project management, all that kind of stuff. What made you leap toward courage?
Well, it was one of those physical courage moments in the beginning when my husband and I were both 33 when he was diagnosed with a brain tumor.
Oh,
and
sorry.
Our son was 4 years old. Well, the jump to I'll ruin the ending for you. He's still alive and well nearly 20 years later.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And so, the courage then first I left a job because I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom for a little while, and my husband was ready to start his career in a bigger way. We moved back to be close to grandparents. And then when he had cancer and couldn't go back to work, he was on permanent disability, I decided to start my own website business so that I could work from home and be able to still be a caregiver and take care of my son. So it was a creative choice to build a life that would work, supplemented by disability income. And then as he got better, I needed to go back to work and be with other people. So I took a leap to go into publishing then. The next 6 years, things changed and my son was about to go off to college, and I didn't want to have empty nests staying home looking at an empty house. So I started looking for new work, and that's when I landed here at the Center for Courage and Renewal.
Well, I'm just delighted. You have been a real delight, and I think you've given a lot of people the insight and the courage to have courage. One final thing you want to tell our audience, because they need you. One final thing, please.
Let's see. I think remember turning to wonder. I think that's the nugget you could take away, is just doing that. Just starting with that to shift things. Just test it out.
I think that is a great tagline. And it's better said. Normally, I tell the people I work with, when in doubt, let yourself be curious. But I like turning to wonder better.
Yeah.
It's a phrase I'm going to use, and I'll give you guys credit. Who created that phrase? Turn to wonder.
Well, it was a combination of our facilitator network. Our Courage and Renewal facilitators came up with that language.
So it's the organization. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Shelly Francis. You're amazing. I'm really glad you took that leap of faith, and you're certainly blessing many others with an opportunity to have a better and more fulfilling and peaceful life. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on your show. It was great.
Thank you.
Great, Shelly. And for more information about Shelly and the work she and the Center for Courage and Renewal do, you can always visit them at couragerenewal.org. couragerenewal.org. Great show, you guys. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Shelly.
Thanks for listening to Step Up with Dr. Margarita Gurry. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and visit redshoeinstitute.com for more information about Dr. Margarita Gurry and the work she does.